Pleased to meet you all. I'm Bob Schmidt, French Village, Missouri. You've probably been out in that area before. Raise your hand if you have. French Village.
USA.
So you don't know where the meteorite fell then, because it was near French Village. But I'm not a scientist. I've never studied the sciences beyond like 1965 when I was in grade school or something like that. So, but I have a lot better advantage now because I have the internet, and I also have Google Book Search, which I can pull up any book almost that's ever been printed and read parts of it online. And then if I like it, then I'll go ahead and buy the book if it has some stuff in there that I can't find otherwise. So I bought this book a couple of dollars in a used store to kind of give me some more background on the science of space, I guess.
Okay, Bob, first thing I want to announce is thank you for all of you being here. And we want to thank John Deere, Simon Stricker, Novi. They are sponsoring this. So without their money, we wouldn't have been able to sponsor it.
Give them my thanks too.
Yeah, so Bob Smith, he's a historian, and he's been doing this since about 1990, probably longer than that with his interest. But he also, prior to that, worked in social services for the state of Missouri. We appreciate all of you coming, and we wanted to announce that you paid money to come into this event. Abigail, can they apply that to an annual membership should they want to? So you can buy an annual membership to come into the museum, which allows you to come to as many of these events and as many things as we have here. You pay $10 to get into this, and the annual membership, Abigail?
Is $40 for the year.
For an individual, or
$100 for a family.
$100 for a family, and you can bring the family as long as many times you want. So after this is over, should you want to, you can go down to the gift shop and they'll let you apply your admission today to an annual membership or a family membership. Also, your admission today gets you in this event with Bob, and then at 1 o'clock we have Mr. Mullins that will be doing a presentation, and your admission, you stay for both of them. We surely appreciate you coming. I want to introduce our curator, Mr. Guy Darrow. Guy, if you'd stand up for a second so everybody knows who this is. Guy is the owner of everything you see in this museum except for this one room right here. This is our St. Genevieve Museum. This is what we own. The rest of it is Guy's collection. So you'll see how massive and how broad the collection is and how grateful we, the St. Genevieve Museum, are to Guy for doing this for us. He's got 8 years at least in it. We're going over 8 years probably now, Guy. So we've been working on it for 8 years. Thank you for coming. Hope you enjoyed it. Bob, you got the floor. Thank you.
I'm very sorry I preempted you.
Oh,
Were you the trailer, or was I the trailer?
I don't think they care.
Okay, so the meteorite was found in my locality of French Village, but of course I live in St. Francis County, so it was a little further east than where I live. And I probably encountered a slice of it many years ago, and maybe only 5 or 10 years ago, in visiting another museum that has a slice of it, which is the Missouri Mines Historical Site in Park Hills, Missouri. They have probably the first, or one of the very first, slices that was taken from the original mass, probably from 1900, in their collection, along with some of the other minerals that that particular person collected at the same time. But the St. Genevieve meteorite, and if you don't mind, I'm going to call it our meteorite, because I have to spit a little bit to get that St. Genevieve part out, and then, of course, you know what I'm talking about. But it should be synonymous with our meteorite. And so the meteorite originated from outer space, of course, and I had some help. Besides the internet and books, I contacted a couple of experts I knew, one on mineralogy and one on space exploration. Art Hebrank, does anybody know him? He's the Missouri Mines Historical Site coordinator, although he's very old and he might not be in that position anymore. But I don't think he can really give it up. But he gave me some helpful advice on minerals, how they're formed. And of course, I got a lot more than what I needed, but he's very interesting to talk to and very knowledgeable about that phase of science. I also talked with Randy Korotev. Familiar with him? He's with, it's in the science department. He probably is a department head with the Washington University Science Department in St. Louis. And as his name or his title might imply, he's a very good source on this. And of course, he had to kind of dumb down a little bit for me because a lot of the stuff that I read, I didn't understand. It's too scientific. And when you get on the internet and read about this, and I strongly urge you to poke around, even if it's just for curiosity's sake, see what advancements in that science has been over the last couple decades because of the space explorations and scholars that are interested in that phase of science. But Art and Randy helped me out a lot, and I'm sure that they would inspire you. And I go over to the Missouri Mines Historical Site, and it is a mining museum, basically. So it has a lot of mining equipment, kind of right in the heart of the lead belt, where the lead was mined so many years ago. The St. Genevieve County Meteorite, I'm told how to do this.
Other way.
I didn't have that technology before today. I didn't know how to do that. Abigail, is it? She was very helpful in giving me some first grade stuff about that. It was discovered in 1888. Now, the person who acquired it, I don't know if he was the one who found it. It was pointed out to him, perhaps. He was a surveyor from St. Francis County, but he was working in St. Genevieve County at the time. And after I completed my work, I wondered if he wasn't doing some surveying work for the for St. Genevieve County for a road or something. He might have had his wagon with him, helpers, etc. And he found that he knew what it was because of his experience. Although this was in 1888, he probably had his education maybe in the 1870s or 60s, but he still knew what it was. And so he hauled it back to his residence in St. Francis County. And it was a very heavy rock, I guess we'll call it, although it's actually a piece of iron. It's, I think, 91% iron and maybe 5 or 6% nickel, and then some trace minerals. And I've asked people, can you think of anything comparable in your everyday life that would maybe not look like that, but would weigh that much? And it's probably a big piece of front loader equipment, a big transmission, or a gearbox or something that would be that big. But it's probably something that the people that lived in the area hadn't really encountered. And I say he found it, but certainly somebody else may have seen it, kicked it, and tried to move it and found out, what's this, you know. But they might have talked about it in 1888 and told him about it. I haven't picked it up yet. Okay. It's an iron meteorite. And there's millions of samples of meteorites. Iron being the rather uncommon. This 3F is a designation from the scientific community to separate it from all other meteorites. And all meteorites have some type of a designation after iron or whatever to differentiate it and to give students and scientists an idea of what it is, what it's composed of. And this is Missouri. Most places spell the name correctly. I have, in my book, I've spelled it incorrectly, and I'll explain to you why here in a little bit, so don't try to correct me on that. But these are some of the other places where, in Missouri, where an iron meteorite of that classification was found. And most of the places are obscure to us. We recognize this one, but we don't know where those are at. So you have to get on the internet, and you can type in 3F meteorite for Missouri, and you might get a better idea of where some of those places are located. Okay, this is another iron meteorite not found in Missouri, but this is the Canyon Diablo, a pretty common meteorite for collectors, and believe me, there are collectors who collect meteorites, and it's a piece of our past, very distant past, and they like to examine them and just like to put them in their cabinet, and I got one, you know, they can say. This is another iron. I urge you to get online and look this one up. Willamette has an incredible history. It was found in Oregon. Actually belongs to an American Indian tribe, and you can read about it. But it's huge. It has a lot of cavities. One picture I saw, there were two children sitting inside of the cavity here. Show how big it was.
Where's that at?
It was found in Oregon. I think it's in a museum in New York City. It's on loan to them from an Indian tribe. Very interesting history. Okay. This is the Graves specimen, which is what I call it. It is a specimen that I think it's probably similar to yours, ours. This was, I don't know if anybody can see this at the bottom. It says St. Genevieve. Okay. The person who bought the mass from the second owner, gave the third owner, gave the second owner a slice to keep. So the second owner was a man by the name of Graves. And he maybe knew the third owner, Mr. Ward. Mr. Ward etched that on the bottom of it so he know that that was it, because all meteorites in this, or a lot of meteorites in this format look alike. You can't tell where they came from. And the Widman-Stratton configurations here, which you'll see later, are not evident here like it is on this one. This is our meteorite, the one that Mr. Woke donated here. It has those lines, and people can identify that and use that to further their scientific study. The other one doesn't have that. I think it was stored improperly over the 100 and some odd years, maybe put in a bag to protect it, but it also removed some of that strata identification on the meteorite. Fortunately, it had St. Genevieve on the bottom.
Do you have any idea what the lines are? Why they were there?
I have a clue, but I can't tell you.
What they are is they're Widman-Stratton patterns. They're a crystal pattern that's only formed in zero gravity. Those patterns only form in outer space, nowhere else. That's what they, they're called Widman-Stratton.
If you look on the internet,
But they're not on all sections of
You
all
have to etch, you have to cut them, etch the surface with nitric acid, and then some patterns pop out. The one we have here, which I guess is this one,
yeah,
it needs to be done again.
yeah.
Yeah.
I saw this one at the old museum down on the square, and took a picture of it through the glass, so it might have obscured it a little bit. But I have a couple other here. This better shows that this is out of a private collection of the same meteorite. And it has that almost abstract looking design to it.
Is there a definite situation or name to a piece that has all of that on it?
Well, it could be a variety of different meteorites that would have that. But if a scientist looked at it, or if they found an iron meteorite and cut into it, and then dropped a little acid on it, would bring out that pattern, then they would know if it was this or not. But as far as we know, the mass that I showed earlier is the only one that's extant. Of course, it's not extant anymore because it's been sliced up. So that earlier picture of the huge mass, that was when it was found or was photographed in 1900. In that form, it doesn't exist anymore. Now, late last night while I was putting some more of this together, I refound or rediscovered some museums, universities that have major pieces of our meteorite. And 106 kilograms, I think it's 2 kilograms to the pound, might have been 200-pound piece, is in the Field Museum in Chicago. And Tempe, Arizona, University of Arizona has a 54-kilogram piece. And various other ones are throughout the world. And as you alluded to, the man who had the meteorite sliced, he sold slices, or gave slices, traded slices to other museums and universities throughout the world. So you have a commonality with Copenhagen and Berlin because they have a piece of the same meteorite that you have here in your collection. Okay? I will mention, this is not in the publication that I prepared because I couldn't find it at the time, but this is a booklet that I put out that has the history as I found it. Not a total washout for scientific information because it means little to me to read about it and most people can't comprehend it. But if you're of the sort that can, you can go on the internet and you can read more technical information about it. I brought some of these with me and I'll give them out to you when you leave at no cost. So you can inspire yourself, form some curiosity as to what's going on here. And please use the internet, and there's any number of search words you can use. This is a private printing, so it might not be on the internet. And I tried to shy away from just copying other people's research. I did have to do some stuff on the origin of it, where it was 4.5 billion years ago, to try to put it in context. But after that, I did more work on site explanation of who owned property and stuff in that area, and also on some background on the owners who have a very incredible history of their own. This is another piece out of the Holman collection. I don't know who that is. But this is another piece of the St. Genevieve meteorite. And a little different pattern. Maybe it was how it was cut or something like that. But there's a site on the internet that will show private collections of meteorites. And I just scrolled through the list, several hundred names, and found this guy that has that in his collection. Okay. Meteorites, I guess were born, we might call it. They originated from the asteroid belt. And I don't know if this is a picture, I don't know if this is a picture in students' textbooks now or not. If you have any school-age children that get to do science, you might want to look through it. Probably a pretty common photo, and probably one that, if you're in school and have some sciences, you might remember. But the This is the asteroid belt, and it's located between Jupiter and Mars. I'm told, or I've read, that the gravitational pull created by Jupiter keeps them in this orbit here, so to speak, that they don't get out of that. This series here is, of course, not a planet, but it's a large meteorite that's in that asteroid belt. Okay, and then the planets that we're most familiar with, and there's another large meteorite. And they're sometimes called protoplanets because they're so big. They might be 600 miles across. I wanted to compute that on the internet maps. How far is it to Kansas City, do you remember? Oh, she probably knows. About 4.5 hours. Well, 600 miles, probably more than that. But that's the size. And maybe when they were first discovered, scientists thought they were looking at another planet, but it was just an asteroid. That was circa 4.5 billion years ago. It's hard for me to comprehend, although billion now seems to be much more common than million when we talk about everyday life. But that's when the solar system was being formed, and Earth went along with that. It's estimated that our meteorite is about 3.5 million years old. It's just a scientific theory, probably based up with some fact, but who's going to dispute it? Okay? I didn't really know much about the formation of the solar system until a few, years ago when that was prepared, but of course I've kind of boned up on it recently. But, and I doubt that a lot of the information that I read on the internet was available to me or any of the universities in the 60s and 70s. So there's been so much more discovery and exploration theories because of space travel, Hubble telescope, etc., to put a stamp of approval on a lot of that information. I'm sure you're wondering how it got its name. Well, maybe not. But it's a twist. It's not what you think it is. What am I doing here? Okay. When the founder of it, and the second person that got it, Mr. Graves, they didn't put a name on it. Lots of meteorites over there. Take a look at it. Okay, so they knew where it was from, but only the scientific community can name them. And there's a certain regimen or direction they have to go to try to figure out how to name them. Mr. Ward, who acquired the meteorite in 1900 from Mr. Graves, he was that sort of person who could put a name to it. Now, he knew where it was found. He knew the GPS coordinates that were given by the person that found it, Mr. Murphy, Zebulon Murphy, the surveyor. And I used those just in early research to try to figure out where it was myself. But it was Mr. Ward who identified it, and he used a map of Missouri. Mr. Ward was from Rochester, New York. So he might have known where Missouri was. St. Genevieve County, no. So he used this map of Missouri, printed in 1869. It was a sectional map. So he used that to try to get a name on the meteorite. He knew where it came from. This is a page out of that booklet, which I have redrawn circa 1869. And this shows the major towns in St. Genevieve at the time. Can you believe it? They're hamlets. You know, if they were there long enough to have a gas station, maybe you know where it was. But I think they might have been on there because those were the post offices in 1860. And he knew it was found up in this vicinity. That's French Village. We had a post office in 1857. And Punjab, you know what Punjab is?
India.
Yeah. Excuse me?
India?
Yeah, right. Up to this day, I'm trying to figure out where that name came from. I'm still working on it. Okay, that's Lawrence.
Larson?
Okay. It wasn't on the map, although Lawrenceston was a community and named such in later maps. But it wasn't on this map that Mr. Ward used. So he looked for Punjab in 1900. He couldn't find it. He figured it was extinct. He didn't want to name it after something that was no longer there. So he just gave the name St. Genevieve. And he took the name from this map. And that's the way it was spelled, and that's the way it's carried now. So when you see the STE, you know that's someone's guess or presumption, as they might well do, presumption that that is the name, okay? So if you see the way it was written there, you might think that came from an early scientific study or something like that. Very important that you get the name right so that other scientists and what have you can identify it. Now here are some of the other towns. Most of them are, I've been to Avon, is the way it is. I've been down there a number of years ago. Look at some cemetery records. And of course Chestnut Ridge and New Offenburg. Weingarten's not there. Patterson, Bolivia. You know, people opened a post office, they had to give it a name. And there's a record of why they named a town or a post office, why they did. And it had to pass the government muster so that there wasn't another town by the same name nearby. So that's how the name came about. I'm going to get a little bit backwards here on, let me mention this. This is a map of today, of where the find occurred. And using the coordinates given by Mr. Murphy, I've designated this point here as where the find occurred. This is in the Goose Creek Lake subdivision development. Most of it, you probably know if you've ever been out there. Okay. Most of it is in St. Francis County. Yikes.
Right.
Okay. This is Highway Y. And I'm living over here somewhere. But,
You need to use the board.
excuse me?
You need to use the board.
Okay, yeah, what
Lock in the screen.
this is a very expensive stick that I bought for this. Let that be a lesson to you. I'm not going to use it against you, but okay.
Step back.
So here we found. Everybody see that?
Scoot towards the screen in that space, and then you can see.
Anyway, St. Genevieve, St. Francis, everybody knows that big old lake.
Yeah.
Can't believe that lake's there. There's actually a cave at the bottom of that lake, Parker's Cave. I was there when I was about 14 with a school group. It's underwater, unfortunately. So Y goes on and on and on until it gets to Winsdale. Probably know that. So that's where the meteorite was found using the present day map. Oops. I'm slow on it. I'm going to do something first. Rather than, like I said, duplicate all the scientific information about the meteorite, I try to bring it down to a local level for people who would read my book and they could pick up on it a little bit better. Now this is a map, a plat map. There were plat maps made at the time, shortly thereafter, and to designate the public land sales in the counties around us and everywhere, I guess, when they were first sold. The U.S. government created these plat maps to identify the boundaries, the names of people who owned it, etc. Anybody know the Buchholz family? Okay. Moritz, he was the, what do you call it, beginner or starter of the Buchholz family out there. And that was in 1857. I think that was in the Jackson School Road vicinity, if you know about where that's at. And then these are some of the other people. I thought that if anyone had this information, they might say, yeah, I was a relative of Toussaint LaHaye, who's more common in St. Francis County. And I remember them talking about that here. Probably will never happen. But a lot of other people here that I know from my other research, especially J.B. Robbins, Buchholz, of course, is actually a relative of mine. There's Nager, etc., David. And some of those are more familiar to people in St. Francis County. It was Ferdinand who owned most of the sections in this area. LeVar, etc. Those are common names from the French Village community.
Whereabouts in French Village do you live?
When I see French Village on a weather map on TV, I've kind of memorized this a little bit. And I use this point here.
Yeah.
I need to have this. I use this point on the weather map as a guide. And then I go down. It's French Village, of course, the scale is different, but it's right about in that vicinity. And I made it look different because so it could be seen a little bit easier. I don't have this marked, but this is a composite of plat maps from 1917, 1920, and 1930. Some of those are on the Missouri State Archive website. So these are a little bit more recent. And it also has the, of course it has Lawrencetown on there. And these are the names of the people that owned the property at that time. This X here, can you see that? That is the site of the finding of the meteorite. Warner's a common name out there, still is.
Karen.
Excuse me?
The Karens down there. I
Yeah,
see
right, Karens and Warners, they're all related, fortunately. Easy to figure out who's who. You can just go up to Warner or Travis or somebody out there, they'll tell you how they're related.
Yeah.
Figure it out. This Loiter is a little bit more uncommon name, but it was right on the edge of his property, is where it was found. And then you have some of the other names that are not quite familiar to me, but maybe to some of you guys. Hey, Abigail, don't give me any grief here. She taught me how to use this. Okay. This is Zebulon Murphy. He was the St. Francis County surveyor, the county surveyor. He's the Mr. Go-To guy when you want to have something done. And he was the one who was either pointed it out to him or found the meteorite when he was doing surveying work in that part of the country. Maybe 1888, maybe a little bit before that. Murphy's a big name in St. Francis County then, and it still is. This is Fayette P. Graves, probably around the turn of the century is what he looked like. He was I'm not going to say he was a mining engineer. I don't think he had any real background in mining, but he liked mineralogy. And he had various posts within the St. Joseph Lead Company, which you might know was actually based in New York. It was a New York corporation, bought by a New York conglomerate about 1864 or something like that. So he probably knew somebody. He got a good job there. Then he went on to be instrumental in the Doe Run lead mines, not the one you have now, but back then there was a Doe Run lead mine, and he was prominent in that capacity. This is Henry A. Ward. Easily found on the internet and in various books, but a picture of him is quite elusive. I'm sure they're around, they're probably copyrighted or something. But he bought the meteorite en masse from Mr. Graves. Now, I mentioned the corporate office of St. Joe Mines for a particular reason, being in New York. Mr. Graves would have traveled back and forth by rail when they had to do company business to New York. And because Mr. Graves was such a fanatic on mineralogy, collecting minerals, and his collection is vast by our standards, and it's located at the Missouri Mines Historic Site. A lot of it is. I think he probably used those trips for some side interests in trading for or buying minerals from other people in the East.
You mind me asking a question real quick?
Yeah.
When the purchase was made, do you know what he paid for it?
I'm thinking that he, and I may have that in my notes because I do have a recollection of that. I'm sure he swindled him. Okay.
I guarantee it probably wasn't what you paid for one today.
Right. And plus it was huge.
Is that the actual size of it there in that photo?
I don't know. I think that might be a monument that was put up for him in that area there. But it could be. I never discovered that. It doesn't really look like it from the earlier pictures. But he probably paid him something. It might be in this booklet. When you get home, you can thumb through it and find out. But he might have traded him other minerals or meteorites that he had on hand.
Is that the Ward that owned the famous company Wards, where all the meteorites and fossil specimens were sold and traded to all over the world to different schools?
He had a museum in Rochester. And I mentioned that he wasn't skilled, wasn't educated in the sciences, but he was kind of like Graves in a way, and that might be why they had a friendship. Graves collected everything, and people would bring him stuff. I have a picture of his museum in the booklet. People brought him arrowheads, Indian artifacts, had a lot of coins and currency, and meteorites were a very minor part of his collection. But somebody gave it to him, and he probably knew Mr. Murphy, and so he put it in his museum. But I don't see, I looked at all the newspapers from back in that era. There's a site called Library of Congress on the internet where you can look at old newspapers. But I didn't find any mention of the meteorite being in Graves' collection. But Ward, like I said, he wasn't educated in the sciences, but he was like Graves. He collected a lot of stuff. And he had a museum up there in Rochester, and he traveled all over the world. Let me read an excerpt from a book that mentions him. Ward printed and mailed flyers to mineralogists, geologists, and dealers throughout North and South America, announcing his desire to purchase meteorites. He also subscribed to a clipping service. I'd like to know what that is, but I guess it's just people would send in clippings. There's a service that oh, I'm looking for an old car from 1880, and they'd send him clippings where it was mentioned in the newspaper. And they informed him immediately about any meteorite that fell or was found. In this way, he learned about the Willamette iron, the big football we saw earlier, okay? And he was able to acquire the 244 kilogram St. Genevieve County iron in that way. When Mr. Graves was willing to part with it in 1900, implies that he corresponded with him when they were trying to work out a deal or something like that. It was Warren's normal custom to slice specimens of meteorites that he purchased for sale or exchange to other collectors or museum curators. And in a short time period, he said he recovered about $15,000 from those transactions, which helped him pay for his trips to Europe, which was at that time by ocean liner, I guess, and train and whatever. So he kept abreast worldwide, as did everybody else in that field, museums, etc., to try to find new discoveries and that type of thing. I'm going to interject something here that you're probably wondering about, as I did. Well, how the hell old is it? Nobody knows. We know when we found it, and Warren later described it as just being a reddish-brown, rusty rock. And in my search for arrowheads and stuff over the years, I frequently find pieces of iron laying in plowed fields. And invariably, they were from horse-operated cultivators, and whatever they had at the time. Pieces of obscured metal that you're not real sure what it is. Well, this was too big to be anything off of a hay mower or anything like that. So the scientists now say that it was formed early in the solar system, 3.5 to 3.6 billion years ago, in that asteroid belt that I may have mentioned earlier. The rest of the solar system is estimated to be 1 billion years older. I was also curious as to how long it was at the Goose Creek Lake development. How long was it on Earth? You'll learn when you look at the internet that our meteorite and the core of the Earth is the same. And once you hear that, you probably think, well, yeah, they were from the same place and they're about the same age. Okay? So our Earth's core, which we don't see, but which we know is there, is the same composition as our meteorite. When Ward examined the specimen, this was in 1900, he said the surface is weathered and covered with 0.2 millimeter thick crust of terrestrial oxides. In places, the corrosion has penetrated 5 to 10 millimeters along the octahedral planes and caused the meteorite to exfoliate. Now, I have a vague idea what that means. Some of you, maybe not so much. But he said it was evident that the find had buried itself. It's not evident that the find buried itself at the time of its fall, and he guessed that it didn't. He said it is known that meteorites of that size will generally penetrate the Earth, coming in thousands of miles an hour from outer space. Nothing to alter its path when it gets into the space of the Earth's atmosphere. Will generally penetrate several feet into the topsoil, given the landing area is not rocky. Well, that area of the county, we all know, is pretty rocky. Okay? Limestone, surface limestone, what have you. But of course, we don't know what the Earth looked like when it landed. Because of other meteorites I've studied, I know that they were sometimes moved due to soil erosion, of course. There could have been volcanoes, of course there were, earthquakes, etc. I looked at the glacial area, didn't completely get into our area, the last glacier in the Ice Age, but it could have, it's just not on the map. Could have moved it a little bit, could have been farther north when the glaciers were there, maybe around northern, that's Missouri or west central Illinois, could have been in that area and was moved by a glacier down to where it was found. Interesting theories. Some people have asked me about the sound of a meteorite. I personally have never heard one. I often go outside, my wife is always kidding me. I go outside about 9:30 or 10 every evening, rain or shine. I take a medication that time of the night before I go to bed. And I step outside and I just kind of goon around and see what's there, which occasionally I see some things I can't explain, but I've never seen a meteorite. So, you might want to try that if your wife will understand. But it makes such a loud sound. Some people have compared it to detonations followed by a rumble, explosion like a sharp peal of thunder, that type of thing. I hear a lot of noises, as you do during the day, sonic booms, and I guess there's some mining explosions because there's some quarries nearby. I can't differentiate. I know the difference between a shotgun blast and these others, but I don't know what the other ones amount to. So, very possibly I've heard a meteorite come in and I didn't know what it was. It's an interesting thought. Okay, we're going to run over a little bit, so if you have a emergency appointment somewhere else and it's more important than me going on, I don't mind, It used to be when I gave programs on the Civil War, people would leave, and it always made me wonder, am I not interesting enough? Did something happen, But I hope that's not the case here. I did, in doing the plat research, trying to bring our meteorite a little closer to home here. I did some research on the early owners of the meteorite. And maybe there's some commonality with other meteorites. Scientists know who found it, where it went, where it is, meaning museums and things like that. Like I said, Zebulon Murphy was the county surveyor for St. Francis. And in 1888, he could have been doing a road survey. A person told me once in the community there that Highway Y didn't exactly run the same course that it does now. They told me that it was a little north of where it presently is. And I kind of thought that plausible because it runs right through what used to be a Gidley property, just east of the Goose Creek Lake. And it runs right through the middle of his property. Property's owned now by Helen Bowman. And I thought, well, back in the olden days, 1850s, 60s, when those roads were put in, they typically tried to follow section lines because they didn't want any owner to have a road right through his property. Of course, this one goes right through, so I got to thinking without any documentation that maybe that route was changed at some point in time. Back then, and even in, I think, to maybe the 30s, we didn't have the road departments like we do now. We had a county overseer who was appointed by the county court. He got together men in the community and they repaired the road. And it always required a keg or a bottle or something to get them to work. And sometimes, well, they just couldn't do the job, okay? But I'm thinking that that's what happened, is that the road was moved and the old road went closer to the Meteorite, where Mr. Murphy found it. And I have some ideas to try to work that theory out, but I haven't. Okay. So he was really instrumental. He sliced it, which just take a knife and, you know. He said he used like a bandsaw type of mechanism. I guess they were around in 1900. Most places had electricity in the big cities. Had a bandsaw with a without teeth on the saw, and he just kept cutting into it. And I don't know how long it took. It's in my book, I guess, but it took either days or just a very long time to cut a slice off of that. And of course, there was a bit lost. Cut a piece of wood, and you have a kerf, so there's going to be a little lost, and it's just going to be dust on the floor. But there's no way of knowing how many slices he made, but there's a huge chunk of it left over after he was done. Harvey Energy. Nobody's ever heard of him. You ever heard of Harvey?
Oh yeah, I've got some of his actual collection.
He knows everything. He reminds me of Art Hebrink, my friend in Park Hills. He knows everything. Of course, when you're in an art museum, you're not going to ask about shoe size or, where can I buy the best car or whatever. But he knows all that stuff. And Harvey Nininger, probably quite a bit about him on the internet. I never heard of him before.
He's the father of textiles.
Okay. When you find something new that you didn't know, which is every day one, in dealing with the sciences or history. And when I was writing about the Civil War, I found this out. When I was researching something that I was interested in, and I didn't know anything about it, everything you learn is a discovery, new discovery. And so then you go off on a link or whatever, and you look around, and you lose your place, and you got to start over and everything. But Nininger made purchases in the 1930s from the Rochester collection, which was Henry Ward's holdings. I don't think he was educated as a mineralogist or what would you call him? Meteorologist, or person interested in spaceologist or whatever. But he began studying in the mid-1920s, and he rode around in his car all over the United States looking for possible examples that he could add to his collection. He got one from Canyon Diablo that we showed at the original step there. And he got meteorites out of the Ward collection from Eastern Europe and everywhere. He wasn't particularly interested in where they came from. He just, if he didn't have it, he wanted it. Also, on another trip east, he was conducting trades with a man by the name of Dr. English, who had a vast museum, constantly traded meteorites with other collectors, universities, and what have you. And he offered Mr. Nininger this 150 some odd, 106 approximately kilogram piece that's in the Field Museum. He offered that to Nininger because I think he was tired of it being there, not knowing what it was. And Nininger wrote in 1950 that he thought that piece that was unidentified was part of the St. Genevieve County meteorite after Ward had sliced it up. And he traded for it, maybe got a good deal, too hard to pass up, you know how that goes. And it was unidentified, it had gone through a fire, in the Ward Museum, and its label was destroyed. So there was only one way to really identify it, and that was the way Nininger did. They had actually put a different name on it, and Nininger figured out that it was a specimen, mislaid specimen, St. Genevieve Meteorite. And Nininger sold parts of his collection to the British Museum, which sawed up the 156 grain slice, and that's the piece that's in Tempe, Arizona State University. I had to read this because I didn't memorize it. Yeah, so he figured it out, had a hacksaw, cut off a little piece. This is what specialists do. You're looking at an old car, you wonder if it's been repainted. Pull up the hood, look under the fenders, see if there's different paint colors under there or whatever. And then Nininger sold some of the slices later on in a catalog that he had put out. And he sold it to other people in his community, in his collecting community, and further dispersed the meteorite throughout the world. That's about all I've memorized. So, yeah.
Do you all have any idea of the original dimensions of the meteorite?
Well, it's hard to they can go from the farthest point to the next point. It's kind of meaningless because it's, you know, the weight was the only thing that I think that, and he probably took it to a grain scale or something like that that would weigh that heavy of material. But it was, you can see from the original picture that it was not perfect in any dimension. And that's from coming through space. Or at least during its life, it was constantly in space, getting bounced around by other asteroids and being subjected to the intense heat and whatever would certainly have particles bouncing off of it that made different contours in the meteorite. Like the Canyon Diablo, which looks like somebody just took a mud pie and just used their finger to punch, indentations all over. And the Willamette, which I've studied a little bit just for curiosity, it had those large craters in it, so that certainly wasn't Earth-born, but it was moved by glaciers in its earlier life too. So, but it's a very, very curious example of a meteorite. And there are others that have fallen. Isn't it in the Yucatan where they said a large meteorite fell? And
killed the dinosaurs. Yes.
Yeah. So the dinosaurs left in 65 million years ago. So, I mean, they're children. They're just bacterial in age when it comes to a meteorite. I was talking to your friend here that when I started researching this, I found that someone had written a little local history about the Nagar meteorite. And I thought, I had the idea that that was our meteorite, which it wasn't. But I've gathered some lore, I guess is what they call it. That's unconfirmed information when you talk about lore. And some of the neighbors around there, oh yeah, I remember seeing that at the Missouri State Archives. We went up there as a school trip, and they saw the Nagar meteorite. You know Robert Nagar, any of you? He's not here anymore, but supposedly his father found it when he was plowing. And they may have kept it for a while, and then somebody showed an interest and they gave it away. But I can't find it anymore. Nobody knows what happened to it. Now, of course, you always think, oh, somebody put it in their pocket. Well, not necessarily. Like the one that Nininger had, the label had been deteriorated. And it could easily happen with almost anything, Indian artifact or whatever. The labels come off, you don't know exactly what time it's from. You can look at it and get a clue, but the Niagara meteorite, I couldn't find too much about it on the internet because there's not a lot to write. So, is there anything else? Okay, how many we got here? How many people are here?
There's one.
Should I count the movie producer there?
Absolutely.
You want to be included? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Should you be 2? Okay, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Are you included?
Heck, yeah.
I donated one to the museum. Maybe the girls have. How many was that? 16?
Might need those at a gift shop down there.
Yeah. Ugh. I've kind of peddled these. There's not a lot of interest in it. I was down at the Lawrencetown picnic one year, had a booth. Most everybody that came up to me to talk had a beverage and a girl, as you might expect. And they weren't real interested in a meteorite, so I brought most of them home. Yeah, and I gave a few to the Missouri mining site.
Or maybe you said years ago. I do personally, but I don't.
And I don't know, I haven't been over there for a long, long time, but I'm sure they passed them out or whatever.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so it's out there, but it's a private printing, and I doubt if I'll print it again unless I find a different publisher. And I have another box of them, so there's not a real reason. I don't think there's a clamor for it. Like,
Gotta have your autograph in it though.
okay,
Yeah.
I can do that. I got a 70-year-old hand now, so I don't know. Yeah.
I got a question. I'm pretty familiar with the area up there. Whose property would that be now that where it was found, you know?
I think, who's that guy that lives down there by the sign? By the deer crossing sign there? I know his name, but I just can't think of him.
I saw that on the map there, it was close to where the Tommy Lick was.
Yeah.
He had the post office there, didn't it?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
He owned that post office there, on one of the go to there.
Mhm.
You know, the old building or,
Yeah.
what's the name of it?
Yeah, I just can't remember this guy's name.
About what area would it be in there around there?
Well, it would be a little north of that.
Oh,
Of that guy's house. Got an unusual house. It's got a roof like this. And I might remember it if I'm here long enough. But it's not a common name to the community. I think he was related to some of the Herman family, as I found at one point in time. But I don't know how far his property goes towards the Goose Creek boundaries. But
It'd be interesting to know if the Niagara meteorite fell at the same time as the St. Genevieve meteorite. I guess they'd have to cut it and do some
Could be a spread.
analysis, but I just wondered.
Spread off the larger meteorite.
well,
Too far, but, yeah,
I talked to
it exploded in it.
the individual I mentioned you earlier in Arizona, who was a big collector, dealer, seller,
Robert
whatever.
Hay.
Yeah, and he told me he had been down there. The property now belongs to David Philo, and I don't know. Yeah, I think I think he owned the property when this group from Arizona came down to look for more pieces of it because they knew where the Niagara meteorite fell. And David had purchased the old Niagara property when he was starting out, and they ran a magnetometer over all the ground, and they didn't get any hits other than what like the things I find. So they looked in the most easily accessible place. David told me he had just cut alfalfa on that field, so it was pretty obvious. If you found something, you could dig it up, maybe. So, yeah, it's possible. I think you've probably got more hope than find. You know, I have found things with my metal detector. Last thing I found was an engagement ring for a girl. And it was right, it was right on the ground, so I picked it up right away. But finding something that deep is a little problematic. If it's even there, okay? But it's part of that inquiry or whatever, curiosity that I know it's here somewhere. I'm going to find it, type of thing. And that has spurred a lot of diggers, and always take a digger with you if you've got a metal detector. But it could be buried in a farm scenario. It could be pretty deep. Yes, sir.
Okay, there are a couple of things. Number one, I represent the Space Museum in Bonne Terre.
Good.
We have lots of folks that come in starry-eyed thinking they found a meteorite.
Right.
And as a rule, it doesn't happen. It's incredibly rare. But is there an authority in the area that I can send them to? I can...
If you can take that role.
I mean, seriously, normally I would send them to the local junior college out to the engineering department, which I don't really know if there's anybody out there qualified to identify, or to Rolla S&T. Most of the time, I mean, they find a lot of hematite and concretions that are heavy and they feel metallic, and you know, oh man, I've got it, but it's not.
Actually, I had someone approach me about
Twice a month we get up here.
Yeah.
About 2 years ago, I had someone approach me from Lawrencetown. He had found a bunch of rocks, or whatever you call it.
Sure.
And I encouraged him to take them out to the Missouri Mines historical site. You know where that's at?
I do.
Okay.
I'm familiar with that.
I don't know if Art still works there or not, but he would tell you. He looked at these boxes of stuff that I went in with him, and he said it was it limonite?
I think that sounds
It's a low grade of iron.
I mean,
Yes. It's an iron ore.
And you can find it on the surface, kind of bubble looking.
Yes.
Yeah. And he said all of their stuff was limonite. So that was a real letdown.
Yeah. That's pretty common.
Yeah. But yeah, he'll tell you if he's still there. And if he's not, maybe his assistant knows, or they'll know someone.
Yeah, it's been a while since I talked to Art, but yeah, he's pretty knowledgeable. And that material can be slightly magnetic too,
Yeah.
and that will fool you. But
Yeah. If you talk to Art, make sure you got the date, because he likes to talk about mining history.
oh yeah,
Have you been in there
yeah,
lately?
oh yeah.
They've
Pardon
got
me?
some of the huge mining equipment they used underground, turn of the century or whatever, and they got that out on display. And so anyway, and sometimes used to be a guy in there. I don't know. Who knows what it'll be like in 5 years? But used to be a guy there who worked in the mines, and he could help fill you in. But
Right.
I imagine most of those guys are passed by now.
Long run.
Pardon me?
They're long. Most of them are long
Yeah.
run.
Still interesting. Okay.
So when that fell, this was not historic time at all. This was prehistoric.
Oh, yeah.
The man may have not even been on the continent yet. I mean, that's how, and if it fell on a glacier or whatever, like you were saying in Illinois, it could have been nowhere around here even maybe.
Yeah. And that's just my conjecture. It's easy to make assumptions that sound authoritative when you don't know anything about what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's just a guess from what I've seen for other meteorites that have fallen, that have been moved. And what's your first name? Sorry. Guy. He mentioned some that were found in Morocco. Is it because there's not any other rocks there, or is it just...
It's all rock, it's just, that's where a lot of meteorites fell, and I was gonna say, I had one on the table, I wanted everyone to be able to handle it. So you can actually handle a meteorite, and then I had a Tektite.
Don't drop that on your foot, okay?
I have a Tektite as a gift for everybody here, so when you leave, make sure you get it in Tektites. When a meteorite hits the earth, whatever it hits, rock, sand, or soil, it blasts it up into the atmosphere, it turns to glass, gets weird shapes, and they come down. There's all types of them. And so I have Indochinites for everyone. I got a little story on there to give you a little understanding of what it is, but when a meteorite hits the earth, this is what happens. Also, just to mention, just in case, in St. Genevieve, with all the old homes, if you want to find a meteorite, you'll find them in the gutters in these old homes here in St. Genevieve.
Oh, yeah.